Welcome to the Acronym Podcast, the only B2B marketing podcast where we don't care about CPLs, MQLs, and SQLs, and instead I'm going to be sitting down with the industry's top thought leaders, business owners, and entrepreneurs to uncover how they were able to build the confidence to make the leap into entrepreneurship and ultimately break free of those golden handcuffs. I'll also be discussing my own story, scaling a multiple six-figure marketing agency in under 12 months, and hope to be able to inspire the next generation of digital marketers to make that leap into entrepreneurship. I'm your host, Chris Roach. Hey Justin, thank you so much for joining me. Pleasure to have you on the Acronym Podcast.
Yeah, I'm happy to be here. Thanks for having me on.
Absolutely. Well, we did have a technical issue before launching this, so hopefully this is going to run smoothly now. We've just been talking about the effectiveness of running a marketing agency remotely and from an RV. You were expressing before that you now don't have that commute. So can you tell me a little bit about your agency and the background until kind of where we've got to today?
Yeah, just a super quick overview. I got my start kind of on LinkedIn. I was a restaurant operator at the time, and I used LinkedIn to try to find opportunities out there. I ended up kind of developing a way to connect with and reach out to people that might have opportunities. I was using it to leverage for a job, but it turned out to be a decent little lead generation system. So I ended up creating a LinkedIn lead generation agency as a side hustle. It turned into a full-time hustle when the pandemic hit. And then probably about a year or two into that, we had about 210 active clients, and we went through an acquisition where we were bought out by a data-heavy investor. And at that same time, LinkedIn slapped down some of the strictest regulations against outreach. We pivoted into a LinkedIn ads company. LinkedIn sent us a cease and desist letter, so we had to change our name from Lincoln Learn to Impactable because they thought the name infringed too much on their copyrights. And then we're about a year and a half from that acquisition point. 95% of our revenue now is LinkedIn ads, and I've stayed on. Part of my deal was I stayed on as the CEO, CMO to help scale things. I still have a chunk of ownership. And kind of some decent options to keep me incentivized to stick with this and grow this into what we're hoping to be, a $50 million company for a second exit.
That's awesome. Was that always the intention with starting an agency, was to go on and get acquired?
It actually wasn't. At the initial the initial start was I had a baby on the way, and I was looking for extra ways to make some extra money. And so it started as a pure side hustle for some extra cash. And then I quickly realized that I had something that, had potential. So I kind of leaned into it more.
And that's something that I actively encourage a lot of marketers to go out and test things on the side. A lot of marketers come to me and say, hey, I want to start an agency, I want to jump into it full time. And the advice is always start and build on the side, get to the point where you can at least cover your expenses, if not your income, then make that leap into running a full-time agency. At what point did you feel comfortable to make that leap out of the restaurant game into the agency game?
So yeah, I would agree with that. I mean, it's a scary process to jump into this full time. I definitely wouldn't quit a decent job and jump into a startup without, any kind of clients or income, just on some hopes. What I did was I had it as a side hustle. I had a job that was pretty flexible at the time, and so I was scaling my little agency nights and weekends on the side, and I kind of built it to be a scalable kind of remote thing because I did have a full-time job. So it forced me to kind of scale it in that kind of way that I was removed a little bit from it. But it got to the point where I was making as much from the agency as I was at my full-time job. So I basically had 2 full-time jobs, and it was very draining. And then it was still a really hard decision to even lean into that. The only thing that I think the big thing that gave me that push is the pandemic hit. I was in the restaurant industry at the time. I was a part owner of a Potbelly sandwich shop. We had 4 restaurants, and the option was I either go deeper into the restaurants and actually take over one of the stores, kick out a GM, kind of like make the best use I can out of my time, or I take myself off of payroll, let the GMs keep running the stores, and I dive into my side hustle. And so I took that as an opportunity to kind of make the leap, because I felt so strongly about it that I felt like if I dove back into the restaurants, then I'd have to give up that side hustle. And I really believed in that agency. So yeah, I kind of took the leap at that point.
Guys, so it was almost the ultimatum that made you take the leap into becoming a full-time agency owner.
Yeah, because I mean, it was really nice and comfortable to be able to try to grow something without having any of the risk. Because I had a full-time job. Sure, it wasn't like paying amazing, but then I had these 2 jobs that were paying about the same. I mean, back then, I'll tell you, I was making $50,000 a year at the restaurants, and I had a baby on the way. And so my side hustle, even an extra 10 grand was awesome. But then at the end of that first year, or at the end of like a year and a half, I was making about that same pace, about $50,000 a year from the side hustle. And so then I was making 6 figures for the first time, barely, with 2 full-time jobs. But then, I had to let one of those go, and I felt really strongly that I could make the agency work. So I chose that.
Did you find that you were making the $50,000 through the agency in less hours than you were making the $50,000 with the restaurant? And did that come into the play of, hey, if I lose the restaurant, I could double this, and I could be making, if not triple this, and I could be making $150,000 a year with the agency?
Not necessarily. So with the restaurants, I was part owner, and I was in a district manager type role. So it wasn't making a ton of money, but it was really not that involved. Most my days were done by like 2 p.m. most of the time, and half the time when I was sitting in the store lobbies, kind of observing lunches and giving feedback, like I had my computer open and I was tinkering with my side hustle. So I was spending the vast majority of my time on the agency so I was probably spending twice as much time on the agency to make the same amount of money. But I had the long-term vision, like with that, I could build these systems and scale myself out. I could start getting my time back. So at the time I made the leap, that wasn't the case. I wish maybe if, it was my first go at it, I was making a mess of it. So I feel like I probably could do a better job of being more efficient and scaling my time better quickly. But at that point, no, I was actually working more in the agency to get that money. So, but I saw the potential.
How have you found that your pricing changed from when you first started to maybe 6 months later, 12 months later? Because that's one of the common misconceptions. I think a lot of marketers that haven't started their agency yet is, hey, I'm going to charge $500 a month for this service. They say, whoa, you need to be charging 5 times that in order to be perceived as valuable and a respected, professional with that.
So I didn't have anyone giving me advice. I basically just had myself, and it did start as something that I wasn't essentially trying to be self-sufficient at first. So I feel like I made the classic. I started underpricing myself very early on, and I actually got my start on Upwork. So before I even had a website, Upwork is where I got my first freelancer gigs. That's super price competitive, so that probably also played into my pricing. But I took kind of a productized approach. So I intentionally did productize my service a little bit, but then I made the intentional choice to then try to make it scalable with people to do execution and writing. So I was putting the legwork for that. So I did start out underpricing. The one thing I will say that did give me, and I don't know how differently I think I would just come out of it sooner, but I do think when you start with lower prices, you get more experience faster. And then what I would say for pricing is, to me, I use it as a growth lever. So as my time on plate filled up with projects, then it was, because at first I needed cash. Like I just wanted the cash. So I was happy selling it lower. But then as my plate filled up and what I wanted was time back, then increasing the price was a way to kind of slow down the flow of projects to increase how much I'm making from them. So I kind of used that as my growth lever and kind of, determining how to walk those up. Looking back, I probably would have learned faster and come out of those lower prices a lot quicker, because the big thing I learned was when you charge 5 times as much, you get a lot nicer clients. Like when you have bottom level pricing, you get some of the worst clients in the world who expect you to, come to their house and hand deliver things to them. It's just is a little ridiculous.
It's quite a bizarre, for me, it's almost like an inflection point. You seem to hit a pricing level where you go from when you're at the commodity pricing and you're competing at the bottom of the barrel, you attract the wrong type of clients, and also you attract the wrong type of management with that, because I find when you charge less, the clients expect to tell you what to do. But when you charge more, they expect to be told what's going to happen, and you can execute on that. So that, again, I understand the hesitancy and the urgency to replace income. And that's something, again, if a marketer's just been laid off and you're going into an agency right now, absolutely, you've got to replace your income. That's priority number one, because when you're losing cash every month, even if it's $3,000 or $4,000 a month of your expenses, when you're hemorrhaging cash every month, that's a really scary position to be in. So if you can replace that, then you get to a point where you can start to be a little bit more selective, and you don't have to bat 100% on the wins and the conversations and the proposals that you're sending out. You can start to increase your pricing and experiment with that, and that's how you tier up to the ideal pricing, which is when you can get into those multiple $1,000s a month contracts.
Yeah, that's exactly right. Tiering up is a good word for it, and the ability to be picky. So once your plate is full, then a new client comes in and they're asking for that same price. Like, you see some red flags and you're like, I don't need the money that bad. And you test out new pricing, and what you find is, like, you doubled your price. Like, you were charging $500, and you don't really need this project, so you can honestly take those bets. And you're like, my price is $1,000 a month now. And they don't bat an eye and they buy it. And then they're like, oh, okay, well, I probably could have gone a lot higher, but 1,000 double sounds good to me. So I'll sell the next 5 or 10 at 1,000. And then you get same position. You're like, my price is 2,000. And they're like, okay, no worries. Or you hit 1 out of 4 on that one, or, the close rate goes down a little bit, but overall you're coming out still way ahead. But from a position of strength, and that you can take that risk versus, I'm hemorrhaging cash, I have no clients, I kind of don't want to seem desperate, but I kind of am. It's a different place to operate from.
And it's a scary place. And it's very difficult to come across and portray that as not desperation on the call, because in your head you're thinking, I need this to make mortgage right now. This is going to cover the mortgage for this month. So it's a very scary position to be in. But as you get better and better at sales, as you get better at pitching your services, as you get better at really, like you say, productizing your services into a complete package that somebody can buy, rather than having all these ad hoc, we can do that, we can do that, and the next thing you know, you've got 10 different services that you're offering.
And that's another thing I would say too. Like, so at first, when I was just trying to get work, like, I was more willing to go wide, and I was like, sure, I can do that. But then as my plate filled up and as I had a core offer, I said, you know what? At this point, this is obviously where I need to focus my time. Everything else is just noise. And I, dropped everything else other than, at the time it was LinkedIn lead gen, and now it's LinkedIn ads. We tried to go wide in a couple of times when we kind of needed that, maybe to increase cash flow. But if once you get in that groove and you're trying to optimize your time, like, going deep on 1 or 2 things is definitely how to move fast and scale quicker.
Yeah, absolutely. Let's talk about actually when you've got your first couple of clients and now you're looking to scale past just you, because that's the position that a lot of agency owners get stuck in. For some reason, there seems to be this magic number of around 10,000 a month is where people go, okay, now this is scalable. If I hired someone for 5,000, I could scale this and get to 25,000. How long did it take you to hit that position where you said, right, now I'm going to scale this outside of just me? And what was that magic number per month where you said, this makes sense to hire someone now, or at least outsource components of this?
So I think this might be one area where, since I had a full-time job from the start, I might have been looking to do that a little sooner, because I didn't need like every dollar from the agency. But it probably was around that mark, like 5,000. Once I was consistently making $5,000 to $10,000 a month, I think I was like, okay, what's next? Like, I can't just double how much work I'm taking, and I don't necessarily just want to double my price yet, because this is selling like hotcakes at this price. So if I can keep it at this price and hire someone else to do, so I think it was around the $5,000 or $10,000 mark that I was doing a month. And then my first question was, or the first exercise I did was, I kind of put on paper everything that I'm doing for fulfillment, and I kind of estimated a little bit like what each thing takes time-wise from me. And then I tried to figure out, like, okay, and what's the most important? What's the thing that's taking the most amount of time, but the least amount of expertise and skill for me? And that was the first thing I hired, which was So I would come up with like the strategy and like the messaging for, because it was like LinkedIn outreach. And then I had someone doing like the actual setups. So they would take what I put and they would actually start building those campaigns and input the setups and help with the reporting. And that was the first thing that I kind of wrote an SOP for and outsourced.
We're going to take a quick moment to pause this episode and thank our sponsors. Firstly, we've got the first sponsor, which is True Classic, the clothing company. As you all know from all of my content, I've been wearing True Classic for the last 18 months, and it truly is the staple of my wardrobe. What I find is that a lot of the clothes that I buy previously were all too baggy, they didn't fit right. The best part about True Classic, not only is it incredibly soft, but for those of you that have broader shoulders, that have larger arms, who just tend to be a little bit more athletic, the fit is absolutely amazing. It makes you look great, and a lot of people call these really the push-up bras for guys. I can tell you, when you wear these t-shirts, you look good. If you're interested in trying True Classic, there's going to be a link in the description of this episode. There's going to be my personal link, or you can go to trueclassics.com/thechrisroach. Go ahead, check out the store. I guarantee you, you will not be sorry if you start wearing True Classics. If you do end up purchasing them, please let me know what you purchased. I'm curious to hear feedback. Moving on to our second sponsor, which is the Independent Marketer, which is an online course and community that I've created to be able to teach digital marketers how to go out and break out of the golden handcuffs and ultimately launch either their own freelancing career or build it into their own digital marketing agency. In the description is going to be a link to that course. And as a thank you for listening to this podcast, there's going to be a special $100 discount on that course as well. If you do have any questions on that, please feel free to reach out to me directly or shoot me a message on LinkedIn. Back to the episode. So you got to the position where you were outsourcing sides of that. Did you always remain the face of the company? Were you still the one that was closing all the deals? Like, were you still handling all the sales?
Yeah, I would say I was. So yeah, the first few positions were basically fulfillment, and I remained the person taking the calls. I remained the initial person, like the main communication. I guess, yeah, the initial first 5 people, none of them really had client contact at all. So they were just helping scale my time. And then it probably wasn't until I think I had almost 10 freelancers at one point before I kind of had the realization that I was like, I need what I call them builders. Like, I need someone else to help me build this, to kind of help with the strategy, help with the call taking. And that's not going to be the same kind of, first 5 or 10 people that I had. Like, it's going to be a different kind of person that needs a different kind of pay. So yeah, I was probably about 5 or 10 people. I was probably about 10 freelancers in that, 5 or 10 freelancers in that I realized I needed that.
Got you. Yeah, and I think that's a difficult hurdle for people to get over, is the execution, especially when we talk about typical marketing agencies right now. A lot of the marketers are looking through this. It's paid ads. It's very scalable. You can have very limited management per week for a specific account, so you can make an extra $10,000 a month on the side without leaving your full-time job. And if you then bring somebody in to start executing on that, next thing you know, it's 15. Next thing you know, it's 20,000. Like, this can build up very, very quickly. But to actually trust somebody to manage clients, that's a whole different level. What was the hesitation there? What was the thought process like? How did you train someone to actually go on and manage clients? Or did you bring someone in that just had the expertise that you thought, right, we can pay more for this because we don't have the time to train?
So the process I took was, I got to the point where we had enough client work. I forget how many clients we had, but I was taking all the calls and I was doing the communication, and that was, and I had outsourced all the back end stuff, but those 2 things were now taking up so much time. Like, even though, so I and that, trying to get someone to do either one of those, I knew was going to take a different kind of person. So at that point, I started looking. I think I made some LinkedIn posts, and I think I made some LinkedIn posts looking for someone who was looking, and the way I positioned it was I was looking for someone who wanted a side hustle. So I couldn't support a full-time employee. I knew I wanted like that kind of quality, but I couldn't afford their salary. So what I was looking for is someone who had a decent job, was intelligent, and was looking for some side income. And so initially I interviewed a handful of people. One of them was Jonathan Garcia that reached out to me on LinkedIn. And and he liked the idea of the side income. So I brought him in and I started him as kind of like an account manager doing the back end work at first. I already had the SOPs for it. So first he actually started doing the back end work. Then he started helping with reporting, and then he started teeing up strategy for me. And I realized, okay, this is good. This is like, you could actually just deliver it to the client. Like, I feel comfortable now. So I had him start from the bottom, learn that he was just making, at first it was like a couple $100s a month. Everything was, I'd come from the restaurant industry. So I think one thing I was comfortable with was margins. I had everything priced out for my freelancers, a price per client per month. So the client paid me X amount of dollars, and I knew this are the steps for fulfillment, and this is what you'd get. And so my labor was like completely variable, which was beautiful for me. So I gave him a handful of clients. He was doing the fulfillment, just the back end work. And then after a couple months, he started doing the client interactions. And then after a couple more months, he expressed interest in taking over some of those sales calls. And ultimately that was the direction he went, and he's still with us. That was like 4+ years ago or something. And he's our head of sales now. And once I got off those sales calls, he actually also recruited then his best friend to help on the ops side. So those two were my first like legitimate admin type builders. They had worked sales jobs together, and they liked the extra money. But then the next roadblock was they were both making about 6 figures at their full-time job. So trying to eventually get them to make decent money or enough with us to that they could justify to their wives why they're jumping ship into this startup and diving into this. That was probably one of the biggest challenges too, of making that transition.
Yeah, I think there's two things there that I want to really dive into. First of all, the marginal pricing structure, 100% agree with. Absolutely the way to do it when you're first starting off, because that way you charge a client $1,500, but you pay somebody $500 for the execution of that client. If you lose that client, you, the business, lose that $1,000 a month profit. So you don't have the overhead, because that's a lot of the mistakes that people make, is they hire too quickly. They get to $10,000 a month, and then they go and hire somebody at $5,000 a month flat, regardless of the services that they deliver. But when you have it in this marginal structure, you can scale up and down very, very quickly. And what we found even with Catalyst is we've built a bench now of very highly skilled marketers who have 1 or 2 of our clients, so that when we want to expand, we know we've got 6 or 7 marketers, so we can bring on 6 or 7 clients in the same month without really having an issue in terms of actually stress testing the company. When you start to have that very broad, that's one of the mistakes I see a lot of people make, is they find one person that's very good and they overload them with 4 or 5 clients. Then that person decides they don't want to do this anymore. Their side hustle becomes too much. They want to either join full-time, or you can't afford that, and you put yourself in a position where you have that single person risk. But the way to structure that is absolutely the way to stay profitable, and then to be able to scale very, very quickly without having that costly overhead. When it comes to actually convincing that person to join full-time, that's a difficult conversation to have, especially and using the example that you talked about with your head of sales. You have somebody making 6 figures. You're probably paying somewhere between $40,000 to $50,000 a year on the side right now. So they're making $150,000 right now. Yeah. Most startups can't support that kind of overhead. So how did that conversation go, and how did you persuade them to join full time?
So the way I did it was their pay was completely different than all the other freelancers. Like you said, everyone else was these set margins, were completely variable. What I did for them early on was I gave them, without giving them up any equity or ownership or any options or anything like that, I gave them pay incentives that were kind of in line with taking ownership. I gave them a % of business that they were managing for me that I didn't have to worry about. And so they first were selling, and they would get a commission on what they sold, and then they would actually manage that business that they sold, and they started developing a team under them because I was giving them a % of what they were managing. So eventually those two were managing 2 huge books of business for me, taking the % from that, and eventually they did actually hit 6 figures in our agency, and they were actually making 100 there and 100 there when we were when we got to that point. And at that point, that was like the tipping zone where they had 2 full-time demanding jobs, and they kind of had to make a choice of, I mean, you can't do this, you can't do both for more than like I mean, 60 more days go by and you're going to be burnt out and you're going to like do a shitty job for us and for like, or you're going to get fired there. Like the decision's going to get made for you one way or the other. And they finally made the decision to dive in. But yeah, we actually we got them all the way up to the point where they were making, the same there as they were here. And I had to, I tried to make that, I knew that was the only way I could ever get them. So I put additional incentives in there. I would say like at the time, per our revenue that we had, we were probably like paying them more than we should be, because I knew like, is either that, or if I lose them, I'm starting over with someone else. Or, I mean, I guess I could, find someone at like 50 or 60K then, but then like the lost amount of knowledge, base and whatever that I had with them, like that probably would have been pretty crushing at that point.
And agency turnover can be the reason clients leave as well. I mean, we've seen that with with some of our recent clients have all come because the agency they're working with, they liked the first person, they turned over, and then they weren't in a good relationship, so they start to look elsewhere. And we've obviously been able to capitalize on that. But that's something to be very much aware of, is when you are having somebody as an agency owner, if you're going to let somebody become client facing, you've got to be confident they're going to be there for the long term, because that can be the reason for churn with clients, which is something that, again, not a lot of early agency owners think of, when it sounds easy to say, hey, for 20% of what I'm charging this client, I can have this person manage them. But then if they're not there in 2 months, it doesn't look great on the company.
Yeah. And coming from the restaurant side, so I think that's one thing that I had a huge advantage over. Coming from the restaurant side, I was hiring people at minimum wage and barely above minimum wage, and $9-10 an hour. So I feel like with the margins that you have in the B2B world and in marketing, or the price points, like the ability that I was bringing most of my people on at around $20 an hour. And I was hiring people that didn't necessarily have any marketing experience and training them from scratch, and they were really grateful for the opportunity. So I feel like our tremendously low employee churn, or even like freelance churn, like most of the people I had as freelancers eventually became actual W-2 salary with us, but we virtually hardly ever lost any actual people, because I think I took that mentality of I can afford to pay them a little more, and I know the value of keeping a good steady team. So I do think that's one thing we had really good going for us.
Did you poach them from the restaurant?
I did at first. I was giving some, and again, most of them were doing side hustles. It wasn't until after the acquisition that we were offering anyone salaries from the start, probably all the way up through, and even a little past the acquisition. It was all 1099 contractors, and we were still under the model of basically getting people at part-time or nice side hustles, and we avoided the risk of offering full-time positions to anyone until maybe 6 months after the acquisition. We wanted to formalize everything a lot more. We got a physical office. We switched to W-2 salaries and benefits, and then scaling at that point I think actually became easier, because we were just able to offer a lot more stability to the team and a better place to grow from.
Yeah, absolutely. Because, like you say, benefits and salary versus independent contracts, or even being self-employed, there is obviously that. To me, it's a misconception that it's more secure and it's more stable. I think running an agency is actually a lot more stable if you're good at it compared to running for a job. And I always say I'd have to have 9 or 10 companies fire me on the same day, and then a year later I'd probably have an issue. But for the majority of people, obviously, as we've seen in the last couple of months, full-time jobs aren't always as stable as they appear. We've had a lot of success personally with Catalyst, actually picking up a lot of those individuals, teaching them what it means to be a contractor and being able to scale that way as well, because there is a lot of talent right now that is looking for work, and I think that's kind of been shook by just how easy it is when you do rely on one income to suddenly go to zero, and how scary that can be. Any thoughts on kind of agency owner, contractor versus employee?
Yeah, I honestly had the same realization that, that running an agency or working for yourself is some massive risk, and it is. But I think I was fooling myself. And I think people don't realize how unstable a normal job is. Like, I've seen so many people, so many good, decent people, like, get laid off their job, hardly any warning, and then they're, scrambling. And then if times are tough and people aren't hiring, it can be really hard to get your foot in the door. And so one thing, like, I really appreciate as hard as running an agency can be, like, you know, you're betting on yourself, and the only way you it's you that I mean, it's you that if you're out in the streets or if you're scrambling for cash, it's because, you know, you did something, not because someone else, you know, made the decision for you. It's controllable to some degree. I mean, I think the biggest risk is that none of us fully know what we're doing. We're learning as we're going, and there's a risk that some mistakes you can't recover from. Like, there's a risk that you make a big enough mistake that you struggle to recover from that. But for the most part, I mean, people that go down that route, like, it's a calculated risk, and yeah, I'd rather bet on myself than. Now I feel like this is a much less risky path than working at a normal job. I definitely didn't feel that way before, but I like the sense of control I have.
Yeah, absolutely, and that's what it is. It is the control that you can earn when you work for yourself. And whether you, again, want to start freelancing on the side and you want to bring in that second income stream, which to me is always a plan B. That's absolutely, I think every marketer, you should be freelancing, because every marketer that I know currently is underpaid. So they should be going on. If you went onto the open market, you would make most likely 30 to 40% more as an agency owner, as a contractor, than you would at your full-time job, if you can sell yourself. Like, most people are underpaid for that. So you have the capacity to start to earn on the side, start to build that up. And if you can get to the point where you can jump in full-time and be in complete control, it's a very intimidating process to go through. But once you go through that first 12 months, I say to everyone, just go for 12 months, figure out what your expenses are. If your expenses are $4,000 a month, just go and make 50 grand in the first year. Just break even, worst case scenario, because after 12 months, things start to compound. Referrals start to come in. You don't have to be scrambling all the time, and you start to build this very, very stable future with this, and every year it gets a little bit easier and you get a little bit more confident. And I think another thing is, not every agency owner is this extremely confident marketer. I personally have imposter syndrome all the time. I'm on my third agency. I used to run a 7-figure software development agency that I scaled from scratch. We're running with Catalyst now, like, we're a multiple 6-figure agency in under 2 years. But I still have imposter syndrome when we onboard a new client, they're a larger client, we're looking at this and we're thinking about the way to do that. You still get hit with those, but it is that wave of realization of, you have the ability to do this, and you have the control on whether this is a successful outcome or not, and whether the business is going to be a success.
I think the imposter syndrome, it doesn't seem to go away. I mean, I'm in the same position, and I've just learned, I've kind of embraced it as part of my identity too. I barely know what I'm doing. I'm doing the best I can. I'm learning and making mistakes. And I think one of the cool things that being a marketing founder, then you get to talk to other founders of way bigger companies. You realize they're decent human beings. Maybe some of them are a little nerdier and smarter than us, but they're not some superhumans. They're normal human beings who are really knowledgeable about their niche, and they're really stupid about other places. And they don't know what they're doing either. They're making the best decisions they can. So that was, I don't know if it helps sometimes and sometimes it doesn't. I still feel tremendously stupid sometimes when I'm, when things are going good, you think you're a genius, and then you hit a rough patch and you're questioning if you have any idea what you're doing at all.
Yeah.
But I do think one of the things you said about, as you get momentum, it gets better. One of the things that was so scary for me was I now depend on this income, and it's kind of okay, last month I had this many calls, how many am I going to get this time? But eventually, the more it unfolds, it's I kept telling myself to be I got to trust the system now. It's kind of the data is flowing pretty consistent. I get about X amount of calls a month, about X percentage of those close. I know these efforts contribute to that. So even if it's down, or if I have a whole week where it's for some reason the calls just completely dropped off, I have to trust, this system and machine I've built and the data from the last 6 months that this is, gonna rebound. And it usually does. So that's eventually comforting, that level of consistency and predictability that eventually comes.
Yeah, and that's what it is. It just takes time. It's for me, there's again another inflection point. 12 to 18 months. Suddenly, you go out of being a cute side project. When you start an agency, everyone's that's cool. Let's see how long this lasts. Then suddenly you start getting success with it. Then you start announcing you're hiring, and then those that were saying, "Oh, that's cool," they suddenly want to apply for jobs. And it's quite interesting seeing that kind of full cycle movement with that. And as you continue to grow and as you continue to do this more and more, and like I kind of alluded to earlier, this is my second agency. I've grown 7-figure agencies before, so I have that track record of doing that. And a lot of people, say, hey, how do you start off and do you go and just close deals straight out of the gate? I was a chief revenue officer for 3 years of a software development agency. I know how to do that. I was never a question for me of could I go out and acquire customers. It was always how do we actually manage an agency on that side of it. Customers was the easy part. It was actually running an agency was the difficult part, and figuring out a lot of that. A lot of it is just making mistakes and being able to learn from those mistakes and continue to grow as a person with that, and that allows you to really become a successful agency owner.
Yeah, and I think that is a big difference. Like being able to go out and get a client and execute on the client, like that's one thing. Like being a solopreneur or being a badass marketer or consultant or something like on your own, like that's a different environment than like scaling an agency with systems and teams and processes and more clients than you could personally handle. So you have to rely on this, machine that you're building. That's a different skill set and a different, level of stress. I think I often wonder if on my second exit here or when I leave Impactable, like if I would ever want to build another agency or if I would like just try to be a solopreneur with premium rates, maybe be less stressful.
I tried that with Catalyst. It's not going particularly well. I tried to do the solopreneur route. I tried to do that, and it's. I have this toxic trait where I just don't turn away good business. So that's if there's a deal there to be closed, I tend to go after it, and that's obviously led us to be successful with that. But you have to at some point hire somebody to do the work, otherwise, again, you start to burn out. So that was my exact philosophy with Catalyst was, hey, we're just going to run. We're going to get to about 20 grand a month. It's going to be a great time. I'm just going to be a solopreneur, and then we got to that. And then we started having more business come in, and suddenly I was like, I don't want to stop. Let's keep going. And now we're in full-fledged. Right, let's grow an agency.
I guess that's true. So you have a big deal, and I'd be the same way. I guess be like, well, I'm not going to say no to him, but then I don't want to do all the work. So I guess I need a couple of people. Oh crap, we have an agency.
But before you know it, you've accidentally created another agency. That was my experience anyway. Because again, my whole philosophy was always go out as a consultant, enjoy it, work 10 to 15 hours a week, have a great time, and that has very quickly flown out the window in the first 12 months.
Well, and I guess the predictability that having an agency offers over if you're only if you're just a solopreneur and you're a solo coach or something, I feel like the level of predictability and consistency of your workflow is like more at risk, because I guess that was one of my plays too with an agency. Like I would have to lose how many clients before I'm personally like, out in the streets or something. But if your whole book of business is 5 clients, because you're just working, trying to keep it to yourself, then 2 clients could be devastating. 3 clients like could be, how am I going to make this next payment on something? Like, so at least having an agency and having more clients gives you a lot more insulation, I guess.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, it's a lot more predictable. And that was again, when we had 3 clients and it was great. And I was making more personally than I pay myself now, but it was just, it's not sustainable and it's not scalable, and I didn't have the confidence to do that long term. Yeah.
Consulting on the side, I guess, would be nice, but not full.
Well, there's nothing, you're playing with house money when you're consulting on the side. You don't rely on it, and you can build up a nest egg, you can put it into 401ks, you can buy a rental property. Like, you can leverage that, like you're playing with house money because everything else is covered. When you go into it full time, you're in the real world now, and it's not always going to be as easy as you think it will.
Yeah, that's true. That's really true.
What advice would you give to someone that is looking to start an agency from scratch? Whether they're, again, in maybe a different field than marketing, maybe they're looking to get into this and test this, and they have a background where they want to get into marketing, but they're not right now, or they've just been a marketer that's been laid off. Like, what advice would you give to someone that wants to go this route?
Strategically, I would say you want to pick an area that you like. Everyone says like niche down, but like realistically, you want to find something like what's your personal advantage. Like it shouldn't just be I've worked for X amount of companies and I can do marketing as good as anyone. It should be pick a niche, whether it's a channel or a specific targeting, and pick a group that you think you have some kind of competitive advantage to help that the other people around you don't, and dive into that first, and make that kind of like, your personality in that marketing field, and go deep there and expand. Because if you start broad and you're just like, hey, I'm a decent marketer, so I'm going to try to sell my marketing services, like that's going to be really hard because you're competing with everyone.
Yeah, and you're not known for anything. That's the problem when you're not known for anything, and you enter this commodity space. And you're competing with Upworks of the world. You're competing with the top agencies, and everything in between. And most likely, your pricing isn't going to be reflective of your quality anyway. So before you know, you're really kind of scratching the bottom of the barrel with deals to try and get anything to come in.
Yeah. And then I guess my other advice would be, really, really invest your time into writing out SOPs and systems, figure out what you're spending the majority of your time on, what the most important use of your time is. Because if you can continually optimize your time as the head strategist, the head leader, and you can, have other people fill in the cracks of those things that are time consuming but not that impactful, that's the easiest way for you to scale in the early stages efficiently and have the biggest impact. Because otherwise, if you get that part wrong, if you either don't outsource or if you're outsourcing the wrong things, you could either suffer quality or you could not get enough of your time back and you could just be working too much. I was working till 2 a.m. way too many nights early on, and I definitely wouldn't want to do that again. Or I would try to come out of that a lot sooner.
Yeah, and that's what I will say with running an agency. There are always phases. For me, I found where suddenly I'm working 15-hour days, and then there's phases where I'm working 5, and it does go. It's very much kind of peaks and troughs with that. It's not always going to be like that. We're not always working 5 hours doing a podcast every day, having fun. It's a lot of it. Sometimes it does have to be a lot of work. And for me personally, the last couple of months, I'm in the middle right now of just getting out of a very deep work, concentrated. We brought on 3 large clients simultaneously. I'm getting out of that phase right now. But again, you do have to go through that. And that's the other thing, is that as an agency owner, as a marketer, you get to clock out at 5. When you work for a company, whether you're in an office or you work from home, there is no responsibility past 5 p.m. typically for a lot of companies. For some companies, even less than that. When you go as a business owner, you're on the clock all the time. Every hour you're not working, something is not being done, especially when you first start, and that can be a very scary thing, and I think intimidating for a lot of individuals to get over when they first start.
Yeah, that's really true. So much of my time, you're right about the cycles, and it's almost like these peaks that you need to get to. So if you just are heads down and do the client work, you're not going to get to that next stage where you get more of your time back. So in order to get there, you have to do your 8 hours of client work, that's your full-time job. And then you have to add on some time additionally to build that next level and work on the business in order to get to that point where, you can get back to maybe working 5 hours a day for a while, and then client work fills up. Now you're back to full-time client work or whatever. And then you have to build and invest in that next layer. So that was definitely my late nights weren't completing client work. I was taking calls. I was doing client work during the day. And then at night, when I wanted to crash, I was building stuff so that I could get more of my time back. And then that was kind of what was taking up the extra time. But that was worthwhile investment, or else I wouldn't have gotten to the next stage and the next stage.
It's a growing pain. It's your side hustle becomes working on the business, not in the business, which again it's very ironic when you actually think about it. And again, I hope I'm not talking anybody out of actually starting an agency here, because I will say it's by far the best decision I've ever made. I absolutely love running an agency, and I don't want to discourage people with that, but there isn't always this amazing work-life balance of 20 hours a week and I'm done now, and I'll take my 10 grand a month paycheck and I'll see you later. There are times where you've got to grind it out to be able to, especially if you want to grow. And that's what we talked about with becoming either a solopreneur or actually running an agency. Solopreneur, it's pretty easy to get to that point and then hit your ceiling. If you want to grow, you've got to grind it out to hit those next levels, and they're all growth pains. And once you hit those, you can start to kind of hit those, higher levels of income.
Yeah, I think that's exactly right. When you said that working on your business is your side project, because the full-time job is doing what you have to do, doing the client work, putting out the fires. And then, if that's all you wanted was to create a great job with flexibility, then okay, mission accomplished, you just pack it up. But for those of us stupid and crazy enough to want to build something big, then your hobby, your side hustle becomes working on the next project, building out the next segment, rolling out some new whatever. And that's, in addition to the things you have to do, that's the things you kind of want to do to get to where you want to be. It becomes like a side hustle. That's a good way to put it.
It's a lot. It adds up pretty quickly. Hey, I do want to be respectful of your time. I unfortunately do have a meeting that we need to jump off to. Perhaps we can do a round 2 later on in the year with this, because I have really enjoyed our conversation. I think you've provided a lot of valuable insights. Last question, just if anybody does want to learn more about you, learn more about the agency, where can they find you?
Website's impactable.com. You can find me on LinkedIn, Justin Rowe. I'm usually one of the top results. And I'm also really happy with our YouTube channel. It's probably one of the largest collections of LinkedIn ads related videos. So look us up, Impactable on YouTube or impactable.com. I appreciate it.
Yep, and we'll have all those links in the bio as well. And that concludes this episode. If you have any questions, please head into the comments where you'll find all of the available links. If you have any questions on our sponsors, all the links will be in the description. Please stay tuned for the next episode.